Kai was not born into money, he was born into struggle. His father, Harlan, woke up every single morning before the sun came up. He worked as a bricklayer, carrying heavy cement blocks on his back just to feed his family. His mother, Mira, sold boiled groundnuts on the roadside from morning until night. They lived in a small 2-room apartment with a leaking roof and one small window. The walls were thin. The floor was bare concrete. But even in that small place there was love. Kai grew up watching his parents fight every day just to survive. Harlan and Myra had one dream for their son, just one. They wanted Kai to go to school and become something great. They believed education was the only door out of poverty, so every month, no matter how hard things were, they scraped together money for his school fees. Some months Mira would skip eating lunch just so the money could be complete. Harlan once sold his only good pair of shoes to pay for Kai's textbooks. They never complained. They never told Kai how hard it was. They just kept pushing forward quietly like soldiers with no weapons. Kai saw everything. He saw his mother's cracked hands. He saw his father's tired eyes. He saw the holes in their clothes that they tried to hide. He never forgot those things, not for one day. When other children were playing after school, Kai was reading under a street lamp because there was no electricity at home. He studied with a small torch his uncle had given him as a gift. He wrote his notes in old exercise books that were half used by other students before him, but he read every word on every page like it was gold. By the time Kai was in secondary school, his teachers had already noticed something different about him. He was not just smart, he was extremely sharp. He understood things fast, he remembered everything. His teacher, Mr. Langston, once told the whole class to pay attention to how Kai explained things. His classmates came to him before exams. They sat around him during break time and asked him to break down what the teacher had said. Kai never refused. He helped every single person who asked. He did it with patience and a calm voice even when he was tired. He was also a boy of strong faith. Every Sunday without fail, Kai was in church before the service started. He sat in the front row and closed his eyes during prayers like the words he said actually meant something deep inside him. He was not the kind of person who prayed only when things were bad. He prayed when things were good too. He prayed in the morning before school. He prayed at night before bed. He talked to God the same way he talked to a close friend. That faith was something nobody could take away from him. Then came the day of the final exams. Kai walked into that examination hall with nothing but his pen, his brain, and a quiet prayer on his lips. The hall was silent. Hundreds of students sat in rows. The papers were placed face down on the desks. When the supervisor said go, Kai turned his paper over and began writing without stopping. His hand moved fast across the page. He answered every question. He checked his work twice. When he walked out of that hall, he said nothing to anyone. He just looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and went home. Weeks passed, then the results came out. When the announcement was made at the school assembly ground, students gathered in a large crowd, pushing and whispering. The headmaster stood at the front with a piece of paper in his hand. He cleared his throat and said the name of the overall best student of the graduating set. The name he called was Kai. The crowd went quiet for 1 second, then burst into noise. His classmates screamed, some jumped, some ran to hug him. Kai stood very still, his eyes filled with water. He thought about his father's soled shoes. He thought about his mother's skipped lunches. The awards ceremony was held inside the school hall. Kai was called up 7 times to collect different prizes. Each time he walked to the front, the applause got louder. His parents were sitting in the audience. Harlan was wearing his best shirt, the one he kept folded neatly in a plastic bag for special days. Mira was holding her wrapper tight with both hands like she was trying not to fall apart. When Kai held up his last award and looked at them from the stage, Harlan covered his face with his hand and turned away. Mira did not try to hide her tears at all. After graduation, everyone expected things to move fast for Kai. His teachers said he was going to go far. His neighbors told Harlan that his son was going to save the whole family. People in the church said God had a big plan. Kai believed all of it. He believed it so much that the morning after the ceremony, he woke up early, sat down at the small table in their apartment, and began writing job applications. He wrote carefully. He formatted every letter neatly. He printed them at a business center down the road and posted them to companies all over the city. Weeks passed. No reply came. Kai went back to the business center and sent more applications by email. This time, he researched companies online. He found job listings and applied to every single one that matched anything he had studied. He applied to big companies, small companies, medium companies. He applied to places that were not even hiring but had a contact email on their website. He wrote over 100 letters in total. Some weeks he sent many in one day. He checked his phone and his email every hour. Nothing came back, just silence. The silence started to eat at him slowly. It was not loud pain. It was the kind of pain that sits quietly in your chest and does not leave. He would wake up in the morning with hope, check his phone, see nothing, and then the weight would come back. He started going for walk-in interviews. He dressed up in his clean shirt, the one he ironed the night before. He took a bus to the business district and walked into offices one after another. Most receptionists looked him up and down and told him to fill a form. He never heard back from any of them. One interview finally came. A medium-sized logistics company called him in for a test and a panel interview. Kai prepared for days straight. He read everything about the company. He practiced answering questions in front of the small mirror on their bedroom wall. He arrived early on the day. He sat in the waiting room with other candidates. When his turn came, he walked in, shook every hand, sat down, and answered every question clearly and confidently. He left the interview feeling like something had finally shifted. He went home and prayed longer than usual that night. Then he waited. Weeks later, a letter came. He tore it open with shaking hands. It was a rejection letter. The words said, "Thank you for your time, but we have chosen a candidate whose profile more closely matches what we need at this time." Kai read the letter once, then he folded it slowly and placed it on the table. He sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. Harlan walked in and saw him sitting there. He did not say anything. He just walked over quietly and sat down next to his son on the floor. They sat together in silence for a long time. More rejections came, some by email, some by letter. Some companies never responded at all, which felt worse in a different way. Kai started losing weight. He stopped eating full meals. He would say he was not hungry, but Mira knew the truth. She could see it in his face. She started putting extra food on his plate without saying anything. He ate a little more when she did that, but not enough. He started waking up later than before. The energy that used to push him out of bed every morning was getting harder and harder to find, but he still got up. He still tried. He tried a small phone repair business with money he had borrowed from a neighbor. He learned how to fix basic phone problems from watching videos at the business center. He set up a small table outside the market. For a while, a few people came. Then the big repair shops nearby started undercutting his prices. Customers stopped coming to his table. By the end of the month, he had made just enough to pay back the neighbor and had nothing left. He packed his tools into a bag and carried them home. He sat on the bed and stared at the wall for a while without moving. He tried selling boiled eggs near the bus stop. He woke up early in the morning, boiled the eggs, packaged them, and walked to the stop before sunrise. Some mornings he sold a good number. Other mornings he came back with almost everything unsold. The profit was so small it could not even cover his daily bus fare to restock ingredients. After weeks, he stopped. He tried reselling phone credit in small units. He tried washing cars on weekends. He tried carrying goods at the market for traders. Every small thing he tried either failed quickly or paid so little it barely counted as income. Then one afternoon, Kai was sitting outside the house doing nothing when an old man who lived a few streets away walked past pushing a large metal cart. The cart was filled with scrap metal, old wires, broken electronics, and bent iron rods. The man's name was Eldon. He was quiet, kept to himself, and had been doing that same work for years. Kai watched him pass. Something inside Kai made him stand up and follow the old man slowly. He caught up with him at the corner and asked him quietly what he earned from that kind of work. Eldon stopped and looked at him for a long moment before answering. Eldon told him straight. It was not big money, but it was honest money and it was consistent. He said if a man knew the right routes, the right scrap dealers, and the right times to go out, he could make enough to eat every day and even save small amounts over time. He told Kai that the city was full of abandoned metal, broken machines, and thrown away electronics if you knew where to look. He said nobody would give that life a second glance. People looked down at scrap pickers, but those same people throwing things away were funding the small income of men like him. Kai listened to every word. The next morning Kai borrowed a cart from Eldon and went out before dawn. He wore old clothes and old shoes. He pushed the cart slowly through streets that were just waking up. He felt a deep sting inside his chest as he bent down to pick up his first piece of scrap from the gutter near a mechanic workshop. He thought about his awards. He thought about the stage. He thought about the clapping. Then he pushed those thoughts aside, stood up, and kept moving. By afternoon he had a half-full cart. He took it to a dealer and collected his money. It was small, but it was real. Days passed, then weeks. Kai kept going out every morning with his cart. He learned the routes. He learned which streets had the most abundant metal. He learned which scrap dealers gave better prices. He learned how to spot copper wire inside old appliances because copper fetched more money per kilogram. He built a small system for himself. He was not happy doing it, but he was surviving. He kept paying his share at home. He kept food on the table some evenings. Harlan never said anything negative about what his son was doing. He just made sure Kai had something warm to eat when he came home tired. On a morning that started the same as every other morning, Kai woke up, prayed quietly by his bed, put on his old clothes, drank a cup of water, and went out with his cart. The city was already noisy by the time he reached the outer roads. He pushed his cart along his usual route. He picked up a few pieces of twisted metal near a demolished wall. He found some broken copper wires behind an electronic shop that had been cleared out. He loaded everything carefully and moved toward the quieter side of the city where a new estate had been under construction for months. The estate was not fully occupied yet. Some roads inside it were newly tarred but empty. The houses were big and quiet. Only a few people walked around. Kai pushed his cart slowly through the main entrance and moved toward the back of the estate where he had found a pile of discarded iron rods before. As he turned a corner and moved toward a section of a road that curved near a low bush, something caught his eye. Just off the road, inside the low bush, close to the fence of one of the big houses, there was a large black bag. It was sitting half hidden between the green leaves and the dry soil. Kai stopped pushing his cart. He looked at the bag for a moment without moving. It was a big bag, the kind people use to travel or carry heavy things. It was zipped up. It was not ripped or damaged. It did not look like it had been there for long. He looked left and right slowly. There was nobody around, no gardener, no security man, no one walking past. The road was completely empty. He stood still for almost a full minute, just watching the bag and looking around. Then he took one slow step toward it, then another. He moved carefully like a person walking on thin ice. When he got close enough, he crouched down and looked at the bag without touching it yet. It was clean, barely any dust on it. He pressed one hand lightly on the side of it to feel the shape. It was firm and very heavy. His heart started beating faster. He pulled his hand back and looked around again. Still nobody. He stayed crouched for a moment, thinking hard. What if someone had placed a bomb inside? What if it was chemicals? What if it was a body cut into pieces? His mind was going in 10 different directions at the same time. Sweat appeared on his forehead. Even though the morning was still cool, he stood up and stepped back. He put both hands on his head and just breathed. His chest was tight. He looked around the estate again, still quiet. A bird flew past overhead. A distant car horn sounded from far away outside the estate. He looked back at the bag sitting in that bush and something pulled him toward it again. He could not explain what it was. He walked back to it slowly, reached down and grabbed the handle and tried to lift it with one hand. It barely moved. He used both hands and pulled it upward with real effort. The bag rose off the ground heavily. It was extremely heavy. Whatever was inside had real weight to it. He placed the bag back down gently and looked over his shoulder one more time. The road was still empty. A curtain moved in the window of a house far away, but he could not tell if anyone was really watching. His breathing was fast now. He wiped sweat from his face with the back of his hand. He made a decision. He pulled the bag by its handle and dragged it slowly to his cart. He lifted it with both arms and a grunt and placed it on top of the scrap metal inside the cart. He covered it as much as he could with some old flat iron sheets that were already there. Then he started walking. He did not take his usual route back. He went the long way around through smaller roads that fewer people used. He walked quickly without running. He did not look at anyone directly. When a security man at the estate gate gave him a quick glance, Kai nodded his head calmly and kept pushing. He did not stop until he was several streets away from the estate. His arms were shaking slightly from the weight of the cart and from the nerves running through his body. His shirt was damp. He kept his eyes forward and pushed all the way home without stopping once. He reached the front of his house and looked around the small yard. Harlan was out at work. Mira had gone to her spot to sell ground nuts. The house was empty. He pulled the cart inside the small yard quickly and unhooked the gate. He lifted the bag out of the cart with both hands, carried it inside the house, closed the door behind him, and placed it on the floor in the middle of the small sitting room. He stood over it and just stared at it. The bag sat there, heavy and quiet. He stared at it for a long time without doing anything. His hands were trembling. He sat on the floor directly in front of the bag. His back was against the wall and his knees were pulled close to his chest. He stared at the zip for what felt like a very long time. His mind kept throwing up warnings. Bomb, chemicals, body parts. But another part of him said no. The shape was wrong for all of those things. It felt like compressed weight, dense and flat. He reached forward finally and his fingers touched the zip. He paused. He closed his eyes for a few seconds and said a short prayer under his breath. Then he pulled the zip open slowly. It moved easily. He opened it wide and looked inside. The sight stopped his breath completely. He blinked once, then again. He was looking at bundles and bundles of cash, notes stacked on top of each other, wrapped with bands, packed tightly from the bottom of the bag to near the top. There were different notes, some in large denominations, some in smaller ones. The colors were slightly different, which told him there were different currencies inside. It was an enormous amount of money, more money than he had ever seen in one place in his entire life. Not on television, not in a bank, never in front of his eyes like this. He just sat there completely still and could not speak. He did not touch the money at first. He just stared at it with his eyes wide and his mouth slightly open. Sweat was running down the side of his face. Even though he had not moved for several minutes, his hands were flat on the floor beside him like he needed the ground to hold him steady. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He looked at the money, then at the door, then back at the money. He could hear people walking on the road outside. Normal sounds, a child laughing somewhere, a woman calling out a name. But inside that small room, everything was completely frozen. Then he noticed something else inside the bag. Beneath the top layer of money, there were documents folded and placed flat. He reached in carefully, pushed the money to one side, and pulled out the documents. He unfolded them on the floor in front of him. They were official papers, contract papers. They had headings and paragraphs written in formal language. He read slowly, line by line. He understood that this money was a payment, a very large payment made in cash as part of a contract between two parties. The papers had signatures, they had dates. They had names printed in bold letters and the name of a company with an address. They had phone numbers and official stamps. He read the documents twice from the beginning to the end. Then he sat back and breathed slowly. So this was not stolen money, or at least it did not look like it. It was payment for a legitimate contract. Someone had won a contract and been paid. Someone had this bag and had lost it. Or left it, or was forced to leave it. He did not know yet, but the bag had an owner. That much was now clear. He folded the documents carefully and placed them on the floor beside him. Then he looked at the money again. He looked at it for a very long time. The room was completely silent. That night, Kai did not sleep. He lay on his mat in the bedroom with his eyes open and the bag hidden under the metal frame of the bed. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the bundles of cash in his mind. He thought about all the things he could do with that money. Pay the rent that was overdue, buy food, buy decent clothes, start a real business, take his parents out of this house. He thought about all of it in slow detail, but every time the picture formed clearly in his mind, something inside his chest pulled him back. A tight, uncomfortable feeling that would not let the fantasy settle properly. The next morning he woke up and pulled the bag out from under the bed. He opened it again to confirm it was still real. It was still there. He zipped it back up and pushed it back under the bed. He made himself a small breakfast and sat at the table and tried to think with a clear head. He made a list in his mind. Option 1, keep the money and start spending it. Option 2, take the money to the police station. Option 3, return it to wherever he found it. Option 4, try to find the owner directly. He went through each option one by one slowly. Keeping the money felt wrong in a way he could not fully explain. Not just because it belonged to someone else, but because deep inside he knew that kind of money entered the wrong way would bring the wrong kind of trouble. He had seen it happen to others in his neighborhood. Sudden unexplained money always attracted dangerous attention. Option 2, going to the police. he dismissed quickly. He knew the officers in this area. He had seen what they did with things handed in. They would take the money, claim it was proceeds of a crime, lock him in a cell under suspicion, and he would come out with nothing except a record. Returning it to the bush made no sense either. Someone else would find it, and the rightful owner would never see it again. That felt like throwing it away. So that left the fourth option, finding the owner. He took out the documents again and read through them a third time, more carefully now. The company name was printed clearly at the top of one of the main contract pages. Below it was a business address in the commercial part of the city. There was also a phone number and the name of the director printed beneath a bold signature. He stared at the name and the address for a long time. Then he made his decision. The next morning, Kai put on his cleanest shirt. It was still faded, but it was ironed flat. He folded the documents and put them carefully in a small envelope he had at home. He did not take the bag with him. He left it locked under the bed. He took the address and wrote it on a small piece of paper, which he tucked into his shirt pocket. He told no one where he was going, not his mother, not his father. He left the house early and took a bus toward the commercial district. As the bus moved through the crowded city roads, he sat by the window and looked out at the buildings passing by and breathed slowly. Now, the story must go back to before Kai found that bag, back to the same city. A few days earlier, a man named Kian was sitting in his large office on the 5th floor of a building he owned. Kian had built his company from nothing over years of extremely hard work, sacrifice, and very difficult decisions. His company handled large infrastructure contracts, roads, bridges, drainage systems. He had dozens of employees and multiple ongoing projects. He was not a careless man. He was disciplined and sharp. But on this particular day, he was facing a situation that had put him in a very difficult position. A major government-linked firm had awarded Kian a large contract, and the contract came with a condition he had not encountered before at this scale. The payment for the initial phase would be made fully in cash. No bank transfer, no check, cash only. It was written into the contract terms at the insistence of the other party, and Kian had agreed. He had seen this kind of arrangement before in smaller deals. He understood why some parties preferred it. The amount was enormous. The cash would be packed into a bag and handed over to him at the signing location. He would be responsible for getting it safely to his bank. Kian trusted very few people. That was one of his strongest rules. He had learned early in business that information shared too broadly became a weapon in the wrong hands. So for this particular pickup, he decided to go alone. No escort, no company driver, just him. His personal car and his knowledge of the city roads. He knew it was a risk. He had considered taking 2 of his most trusted security men, but something told him the fewer people who knew the details of this movement, the better. He made the decision on the morning of the handover and did not change it. He told no one in his office where he was going. What Kian did not know was that the information had already leaked. Not from his office, but from somewhere much closer to the contract. One of the junior officials at the firm issuing the contract had spoken carelessly to someone over the phone before the signing. That someone was a man named Vance who ran a small network of street-level criminals. He was not loud or obvious. He operated quietly through fear and carefully placed informants. When Vance heard there was a cash payment of a large amount being handed to a private businessman, he immediately began planning. He had done this kind of thing before and always managed to disappear without a trace. Vance placed 2 of his men on surveillance duty near the building where the contract was to be signed. They sat in a black car parked across the road and waited. On the day of the handover, they watched Kian arrive, enter the building, and come back out later carrying a large black bag. They noted the color and size of the bag. They noted Kian's car and the license plate. One of Vance's men sent a message immediately. Within minutes, the black car pulled slowly into traffic, 2 vehicles behind Kian's car, and began following him through the city. They stayed back enough to not be obvious, but close enough to not lose him. Kian noticed the car when he turned off the main road. At first he thought it was coincidence. Then he turned again onto a smaller street, and the black car followed. His stomach tightened. He gripped the steering wheel harder. He was not a man who panicked easily, but this was different. He had a bag full of cash on his passenger seat, and an unknown car was behind him. He began taking detours, left turns he did not need to make. A loop through a roundabout twice. The car stayed with him, not close enough to confirm they were following, but too consistent to be random. His breathing became shallow and fast. He accelerated slightly and wove through some traffic. He turned into a residential road that led toward a newer part of the city. The black car disappeared from his mirror. For a moment. He used that window. He saw a stretch of road ahead with low bushes on the right side near the fence of a gated estate. He made a quick decision. He slowed down, pulled over to the right, grabbed the bag from the passenger seat and got out fast. He pushed the bag deep into the low bush near the fence. He looked for something to use as a marker and pressed 2 large stones together near the spot, forming a small V shape. Then he jumped back in the car and drove off fast. He drove hard for several minutes, weaving through back roads. Then, without warning, the black car appeared again from a side street and pulled directly in front of him, blocking the road. 2 more men appeared from behind. They were masked. They moved toward his car, fast with guns raised. Kian had no time to reverse. They were on him in seconds. They pulled him out of the car. One pressed a gun to his side and demanded the bag. Kian said there was no bag. He said he had dropped it at the signing location. Another man hit him hard across the shoulder and told him to get on the ground. He went down. They searched the car, they opened the boot. They checked under the seats. They checked the back seats. They found nothing. The man with the gun stood over Kian, lying face down on the road, and the tension stretched for a very long time. Then one of them said something in a low voice that Kian could not hear clearly. There was a short argument between them. Then the leader told Kian not to move or he would be followed. They got back in the black car and reversed hard down the street and disappeared. Kian lay on the road for more seconds, just breathing. Then he got up slowly. His hands were shaking. His shoulder, where he had been hit, was throbbing with pain. He got back in his car and sat for a moment with his hands gripping the wheel. Then he drove back quickly toward the estate. He found the road. He drove slowly, looking at the right side of the fence. He found the 2 stones he had pressed together in a V shape. He got out of the car and pushed into the low bush. He looked around the spot carefully. He got on his knees and pressed his hands into the leaves in the dry soil. The bag was not there. He searched wider, left side, right side, further in. Nothing. The bag was gone. Kian stood up and looked around the empty road. His face was completely blank. Not angry yet, just blank. He could not process what had happened. He walked back to his car and sat down. He stared at the steering wheel. The bag with the contract payment was gone. The money was gone. The documents were gone. The men who had robbed him had not even found the bag, which meant someone else had taken it. Someone had come along that road between the time he hid the bag and the time he came back. Someone had found it and taken it, and now it was gone. He sat in that car for a long time without starting the engine. When Kian finally got home, he sat alone in his study. He did not tell his wife what had happened. He did not call anyone in his company. He sat with the weight of it alone. The contract firm would come looking for assurance that the money had been received and deposited. He had signed papers confirming receipt. He was now responsible for that money. If it could not be recovered, the consequences would be severe. His reputation, his company, the contract itself, everything was now hanging. He pressed his fingers against his forehead and sat in the dark study for a very long time, trying to think of what to do next. The next morning, Kian sent one of his most trusted workers to the area near the estate quietly to ask around. He did not tell the worker what was missing or why. He only said to check if anyone had seen anything unusual near the bush by the fence on that road. The worker came back and said a few residents had seen a man with a scrap cart in the area on the morning in question. A hawker. Nobody knew his name. Nobody knew where he came from. The information was thin. Kian sat with it. A scrap hawker, someone with a cart who probably took the bag without knowing what was inside or who knew exactly what was inside. He could not tell which one it was yet. Kian began sending men quietly to scrap dealers in the area, asking if anyone had come in recently with a large bag or with a lot of unusual cash. Nothing came back. He had people checking pawn shops and informal money exchange spots. Nothing. Days passed with no news. Kian kept his normal schedule at the office. He answered calls, he attended meetings, he signed papers, but underneath all of it, he was burning. He could not sleep properly. He could not eat full meals. He kept his phone close at all times, waiting for any piece of information that would help him find the bag or the person who took it. Then on the morning when Kai arrived at the company building, he walked up to the security post at the entrance wearing his faded clean shirt and holding the envelope. One of the 2 guards at the gate looked at him with obvious suspicion, A young man with worn shoes and a careful look on his face, arriving without a vehicle, without an appointment, and without a company name tag. The guard told him flatly that visitors needed appointments and he should leave. Kai did not argue. He reached into the envelope carefully and pulled out one of the official documents from the bag. He held it out toward the guard and said he needed to see whoever this company belonged to. It was urgent. The guard took the document and looked at it. His expression changed slightly. He told Kai to stay where he was and went inside. He walked quickly through the ground floor and took the stairs to the upper office area. When he knocked on the door of the office administrator and handed the document to her, she looked at it. Her eyes moved fast across the page and then she stood up quickly. She walked down the corridor and knocked on the heavy door at the end. The voice inside said, "Come in." She entered and placed the document on the desk in front of Kian. Kian looked down at it. He was perfectly still for 3 full seconds. Then he stood up fast and walked past her without a word. He came down the stairs quickly and walked through the ground floor. He pushed through the front door and came out into the morning air. The guard was standing near the gate and Kai was standing a short distance away. Kian looked at Kai, a young man, thin, quiet eyes, worn clothes, holding an envelope. Kian walked toward him directly and stopped in front of him. He asked in a low and tight voice if this person was the one who brought the document. The guard nodded. Kian looked at Kai for a long moment. Then he said simply, "Come with me." He took Kai back up to his office on the 5th floor. He told his staff to hold all his calls. He closed the office door and pointed Kai toward a chair. He sat across from him and leaned forward with both elbows on the desk. He asked Kai calmly to explain from the very beginning exactly how the document came into his possession. Kai looked at the man sitting across from him, the large desk, the clean suit, the heavy silence. He placed the envelope on the desk and began to speak. He told the whole thing from the beginning, the estate road, the bush, the bag, the wait, the cart, going home, reading the documents. Kian listened without interrupting once. His face did not change much, but his eyes were intense and fully fixed on Kai. When Kai finished speaking, there was a silence that lasted several seconds. Then Kian asked the question that mattered most. He asked where the bag was now. Kai said it was at his house under the bed. He had not touched the money. He had not spent a single note. Everything was exactly as he had found it. Kian sat back slowly in his chair. He pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling for a brief moment. Then he looked back at Kai and asked if he was willing to take him there now. Kai said yes. They left the building together. Kian's driver brought the car around and they both got in the back. Kian said nothing during the drive. Kai gave directions quietly from the front seat and the car moved through the busy roads and eventually into the narrower streets of the neighborhood where Kai lived. People on the road turned to look at the clean, expensive car moving slowly through the area. Children stopped playing to stare. Women selling by the roadside looked up. The car stopped in front of Kai's house. Kian stepped out. He looked at the building for a moment. Small, worn, the cracked paint on the walls, the small yard. He stepped inside behind Kai without a word. Kai went straight to the bedroom. He pulled the bag out from under the bed and carried it into the sitting room. He placed it on the floor in front of Kian and stepped back. Kian crouched down and unzipped the bag. He went through it quickly, checking the money and then checking the documents carefully. He counted the bundles with his eyes. He checked the papers one by one. After several minutes, he stood back up. He looked at Kai standing quietly by the doorway. He took a long, slow breath. Then he said nothing for a moment. He just looked at Kai with an expression that was very hard to describe, something between disbelief and something much deeper. They carried the bag to the car together. Kian's driver placed it in the boot. They drove in silence for a while. Then Kian spoke. He asked Kai if anyone else knew about the bag. Kai said no. He had told no one. Not his parents, not a friend, no one. Kian nodded slowly. Then he asked why. Why had Kai not kept the money? He asked it directly and without softness. He wanted the real answer. Kai looked out the window for a second, and then turned back to Kian and said simply that the money was not his. And that was the full answer. Kian looked at him for a long moment and said nothing more. They stopped at a large bank. Kian took the bag from the boot and walked inside. He was there for a while. Kai waited in the car. He watched people walk in and out of the bank entrance. He watched a security guard standing still in the sun. He sat with his hands in his lap and thought about nothing specific, just the quiet. When Kian came back to the car, his face looked lighter. The tight wound look he had worn since leaving the office was slightly gone. He got in the car and told the driver to take them back to the office. He did not say anything else for the first few minutes of the ride. Back at the office, Kian poured 2 glasses of water and placed one in front of Kai. He sat down across from him again like before. Then he asked Kai to tell him about himself. Not about the bag, about his life. Kai was quiet for a moment, then he began to speak. He spoke about his parents, about school, about the graduation, about the 100 job applications, about the rejections, about the small failed businesses, about the scrap cart. He did not say any of it in a dramatic way. He said it plainly and slowly, like a person reading from a list. The room was very quiet the whole time. Kian did not interrupt. When Kai finished, Kian sat back. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that he had met many people in business, smart people, educated people, people with connections and strong families behind them. He said he had not met many people who could find a bag full of money, sit with it for days, and return every note of it. He said that kind of person was rare, the kind of rare that most businesses needed deeply but never found. Then he stopped talking. He picked up his phone and called someone. He spoke for a few minutes in a low voice. Then he put the phone down and looked at Kai and said he had a proposal to discuss. But before Kian could get to the full proposal, his office phone rang. He picked it up. His face changed as soon as he heard the voice on the other end. He sat up straight. He held the phone tight. The voice on the other end was from the firm that had paid the contract. They had heard rumors. Someone from inside had leaked information that Kian had not yet confirmed receipt of the funds to the right channels. They were asking questions, serious questions. If the money could not be confirmed as properly received and deposited against the contract terms, the entire agreement could be declared void. And worse, Kian could face a formal investigation. Kian kept his voice steady on the phone. He told them the funds had been received and were being processed through proper channels. He told them documentation would be provided soon. He put the phone down and sat very still. The problem was not fully over. Even though the money was now in the bank, the formal documentation trail had a gap. The original handover documents had been inside the bag. Kai had kept them safe and returned them, but there were questions about the timeline. Why had the deposit taken this long after the signing date? Kian knew that if the wrong kind of attention came to this situation, it could open a door he did not want opened. The next morning, Kian arrived at his office early and called in his legal team. He laid out the situation carefully, leaving out the part about the bag being lost and found by a scrap hawker. He framed it as a security concern during transport that delayed the deposit. His lawyers listened and began working on the documentation immediately. They prepared a formal timeline of events with supporting signatures and bank confirmation slips. Kian signed what needed to be signed. He sent the full documentation package to the contract firm by midday. Then he sat back and waited for their response. The hours that followed were slow and heavy. By late afternoon, a response came from the firm. They accepted the documentation, the contract was confirmed as fully active, the timeline had been accepted without further questioning. Kian closed the email and sat very still in his chair. He had been carrying this situation for days, and now the immediate danger had passed. He let out a slow breath, but even as the relief came, something else stayed in his mind. The image of a young man in worn shoes standing outside his gate holding an envelope. A young man who could have walked away with everything and chose not to. That image would not leave him. Then a second problem arrived days later, and it came from a direction Kian had not expected. One of his longtime senior managers, a man named Nolan, who had been with him for years, came to his office with a very uncomfortable expression. He closed the door behind him and sat down. He told Kian that there was talk in certain circles about the contract cash payment. He said Vance's network had not gone quiet after failing to get the bag. They had heard through their own channels that the money had made it back to Kian safely. They were now looking for answers about how. They wanted to know who had found the bag and where. Kian went cold. Kian asked Nolan how reliable this information was. Nolan said it came from someone who was close to one of Vance's contacts and that it was not rumor. He said Vance's men were already making inquiries in the neighborhoods near the estate where the bag had been found. They were asking scrap dealers, market traders, anyone who might know a young hawker in that area. Kian stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the city below. If Vance's people found Kai before Kian could do something, the situation would become extremely dangerous. Kai had no protection. He had no connections. He was alone in a small house in an exposed neighborhood. Kian picked up his phone immediately and called Kai. The phone rang several times, no answer. He called again. This time it picked up and his voice was normal, calm. He was at home. Kian told him in a firm but controlled voice not to go out alone. Not that evening, not tomorrow morning. He told him to stay inside and that he would explain everything shortly. He told him to open the door for no one. Then he called his head of security, a man named Brock, and told him to take 2 men to Kai's address immediately and stay there until further notice. Brock asked no questions. He moved. Kai heard the urgency in Kian's voice, and it frightened him. He had returned the bag in good faith and thought the matter was done. He did not understand why he should now be afraid. He sat inside the house with the door locked. His mother Mira was at her selling spot, and he wanted to call her and tell her to come home, but he did not want to frighten her without explanation. He sat on the low chair in the sitting room and watched the door. Later there was a knock. He did not open it. A voice on the other side said they were sent by Kayan. He opened the door carefully. 2 large, quiet men stood there. They came inside without a word, and one of them stood by the window. Mira came home later and found 2 unknown men in her sitting room. She dropped her groundnut tray and screamed. Kai came running from the bedroom and quickly explained. It took several minutes to calm her down. Harlan came home shortly after, and the same explanation had to happen again. Harlan said very little. He sat in the corner of the room and looked at the 2 security men for a long time without expression. Then he looked at Kai and asked in a quiet voice what exactly his son had gotten himself into. Kai sat down and began to explain the full story for the first time to his parents. The room became very still as he spoke. When Kai finished, Mira sat with both hands pressed over her mouth. Harlan was very still. The security men stood by the door and window, like they were part of the wall. Mira was the first to speak, and she said only one thing. She said Kai had done the right thing. She said it quietly like it was a fact, and not a question. Harlan nodded once, but said nothing else. Kai looked at both of them, and felt a strange mixture of fear, and something that felt like peace, sitting right beside the fear. He went to the kitchen and made everyone tea because he did not know what else to do with his hands. Kian arrived at the house early the next morning himself. He came in a different car, a less obvious one. He sat with Kai in the small sitting room while Harlan and Mira stayed in the bedroom at his request. He told Kai the full truth. He explained who Vance was. He explained what had happened on the road the day he hid the bag. He explained that the people who had tried to rob him had not found the bag, but had now figured out someone else had, and they were looking. Kai listened without speaking, and when Kian finished, Kai asked one question. He asked if these men would come to his home. Kian said it was a real possibility, and that was why they needed to move quickly. Kian told Kai that he was arranging for him and his family to move temporarily to a secured location. He said it was not a request, but a very strong recommendation. Kai pushed back. He said he could not just leave without explaining it properly to his parents, and he was not sure they would agree to leave their home. Kian said he understood, but that every hour they stayed in that house was a risk. He said his security team had already begun looking into Vance's network and was working on how to neutralize the immediate threat. But until that was done, Kai and his family needed to be somewhere safe. He looked at Kai steadily and waited. That evening, after a long and difficult conversation involving tears from Mira and long silence from Harlan, the family agreed to go. Kian's people came with 2 vehicles. They moved quietly with only a few bags each. Kai looked back at the house as they drove away. The small yard, the cracked paint, the thin window. He had lived there his whole life. He had no idea when or if they would be coming back. He turned forward in the seat and said nothing. The car moved through the dark streets, and he sat with his hands folded in his lap. One of the security men beside him said they would be somewhere safe soon. Kai nodded. Meanwhile, Vance was not sitting still. He had his men move through different neighborhoods near the estate, asking about a young man with a scrap cart. One of his informants came back with a description. A young man, thin, quiet, faded shirt, pushed a cart toward the newer estate area regularly. The description was thin, but Vance sent 2 men to the area anyway to watch and ask around more. By the next day, one of his men had found a scrap dealer who remembered a young man coming in with a heavy cart around the same time the bag had gone missing. The dealer gave a rough description of the direction the man had come from. Vance's men noted it down. The next morning, those same men went through the neighborhood block by block, asking questions, until a woman at a roadside stall said yes. She knew a young man who collected scrap. She pointed toward the street where Kai's house was. One of Vance's men walked to the address. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. He tried the gate. It was locked from outside. When he looked through the narrow gap and saw the empty yard, he stood there for a moment, then walked away slowly and made a phone call. He told Vance the house was empty. Vance went very quiet on the phone. Then he said, "Find out where they went." He said it without raising his voice. Back on Kian's side, Brock had been tracking Vance's movements through a contact he had maintained for years inside the informal network. That contact sent a message saying Vance's men had visited Kai's house and found it empty. Brock told Kian. Kian called an immediate meeting with his legal team and his security team. He told them that the situation was escalating and he was no longer willing to handle it quietly. He said he was going to the relevant authorities formally. His lawyers advised him carefully on how to do it without exposing the details of the cash contract more than necessary. They worked through the night on the approach. The following morning, Kian made a formal report to a senior investigative unit he had a prior relationship with. He gave them the name and the details of the armed robbery on the road. He provided his own account of the attack, the weapons, the men, the car description. He gave everything he had. The unit moved fast because the case had multiple serious components, including armed robbery and organized crime activity. Soon, warrants were issued. Within days, 3 of Vance's main associates had been picked up in different parts of the city during coordinated early morning operations. Vance himself had moved, but the net was tightening. Kai knew none of the operational details. He was at the secured property Kian had arranged. It was a gated house in a calm and private area of the city. His parents were with him. Mira had begun cooking in the unfamiliar kitchen because it was the only way she knew how to feel settled in a new place. Harlan sat on a bench in the small garden and watched the birds. Kai spent the days reading whatever he could find in the small bookshelf in the sitting room. He had been given a phone. Kian called him each day to give him a brief update. Short calls, calm voice. The message was always the same. Stay put. It is being handled. Then, days after they had moved, Brock called Kai directly and told him that Vance had been apprehended early that morning trying to leave the city through a checkpointed road. He said the immediate threat to Kai and his family was now neutralized. He said Kian would come to see them that afternoon and explain the next steps. Kai sat with the phone in his hand after the call ended. He looked at the ceiling of the room he was sitting in. He heard his mother moving in the kitchen. He heard his father's slow footsteps in the corridor. He placed the phone down on the table beside him and sat very still for a long time. When Kian arrived that afternoon, he came alone. He sat in the small sitting room with Kai while Mira brought tea, and then quietly left them. Kian looked different from the first time Kai had seen him. Not more relaxed exactly, but more present. He told Kai the full account of what had happened, the arrests, the warrants, the case being formally processed. And he said there would likely be a need for Kai to provide a statement at some point, but that his legal team would ensure Kai was protected through that process and that his name would be kept out of any public record as much as the law allowed. Kai listened to all of it carefully. Then Kian told Kai something else. He said he had been thinking about what Kai had done since the day he walked into that office. He said he had turned it over many times in his mind. He said he had watched how Kai carried himself through the chaos of the past days. Calm, honest, no complaint, no negotiation, no attempt to use the situation for personal advantage. He said he had spent years building a company, and the thing that had cost him the most was not money or competitors or difficult contracts. It was trust. Finding people he could trust completely. He said he had not found many. Then he looked at Kai directly and said he wanted to offer him a position in his company. Kai was quiet. He looked at Kian without speaking for a moment. Then he asked what kind of position. Kian said he would start in an operational support role where he could learn the structures of the business from the inside. He said the salary would be real and fair. He said he believed Kai would grow quickly because of how his mind worked. He said none of this was charity. He said he was not doing it because he felt sorry for Kai. He said he was doing it because he needed someone he could trust in his company, and Kai had already shown him more proof of that quality than most people showed in years. He said the decision was Kai's to make. Kai asked for one night to think about it. Kian nodded and said of course. He left the house and Kai sat alone in the room after his parents had gone to bed. He thought about the offer for a long time. He thought about the years of trying and failing, the 100 rejections, the scrap cart. He thought about the bag and what he had done with it. He thought about what Kian had said about trust. He thought about his mother's hands and his father's eyes. He thought about what the next morning would look like if he said yes, and what it would look like if he said no. He sat with all of it until the room was completely dark and quiet. The next morning Kai called Kian before breakfast. He said yes. Kian said good. He said he would make the arrangements and Kai would begin within the week. He said his family could continue staying at the secured house until everything was fully settled, and it was safe for them to return home or to relocate somewhere more comfortable if that was what they preferred. Kai thanked him and put the phone down. He went to the kitchen where his mother was making porridge. He told her quietly that he had been offered a real job and he had accepted it. Mira stopped stirring the pot. She turned around and looked at her son. She said nothing. She just held his face with both hands. His first day at the company was a Monday. He arrived early wearing a clean, simple outfit that Kian had arranged through his assistant. He was introduced to the team by Kian himself, who said only that Kai was joining the operations division and that he expected everyone to work with him openly. Nobody was told the full story. Kai was shown around the building, given his desk, introduced to his immediate colleagues, and handed a folder of materials to review. He sat at the desk and opened the folder. His hands were very still. His breathing was steady. He looked at the words on the first page and began to read carefully. The room around him was full of the ordinary noise of people working. The weeks that followed were not easy. There was a lot to learn. Kai took notes constantly. He asked questions when he did not understand something, and he worked late most evenings going through documents and procedures on his own. Some of his colleagues were friendly. Some were cautious around him, because they did not fully understand how he had arrived or what his relationship to Kian was. There were small, uncomfortable moments, a comment made indirectly, a meeting he was left out of once, a task given to him that was below the level of his ability. He said nothing about any of it. He came in every morning and did his work with the same steadiness he had shown through everything before. Kian watched from a distance. He checked in briefly with Kai once a week, not to manage him, but to ask how he was finding things and whether he needed anything. Kai always said he was fine and had one or two specific questions about the work. After months, Kian began including Kai in some of the broader briefings. After more months, he gave him a small project to coordinate independently. Kie managed it carefully and without drama. He delivered it on time. The results were clean and correct. Kian looked at the report and said nothing to Kai directly, but made a note of it mentally. This was the beginning of something that was going to take time to build properly. But it was real. Outside the office, Kai's parents had settled back into the city. The house they had grown up in was still there, but Kian had quietly arranged for some repairs to be done to the roof and the walls while they were away. Mira walked back in on the first day and saw the new paint on the walls and the sealed roof, and she sat down on the chair inside the door and cried for a short time. Harlan walked through the room slowly and touched the walls with one hand. He did not say much. He sat in the garden area out back and closed his eyes for a long time in the morning sun. Kai stood in the doorway and watched his father sit there peacefully. The court case involving Vance and his associates moved slowly through the legal system as these things always do, but the charges were serious and the evidence was solid. Kai gave a formal statement once in a protected setting with Kian's lawyer present. The process was professional and Kai's identity remained shielded in the public filing. It was a single afternoon of giving an account of what he had seen and done. He answered every question directly. When it was over, he drove back to the office and returned to his desk and continued working on a logistics report he had been preparing. He closed the folder after the case procedure the same way he closed any other file. He moved forward. There was one evening, several months after everything, when Kai was working late and the office had emptied out. The lights in the main space were dimmed to low and only his desk lamp was still on. He sat back in his chair and looked around the quiet room. The desks, the windows with the city lights outside, the folder in his hand with the company letterhead at the top. He thought about the morning he had found the bag. He thought about standing in that bush with his heart pounding and sweat running down his face. He thought about sitting on the floor of his family's small sitting room, staring at bundles of money he had not touched. He thought about the choice, not the choice to return the bag. In his heart, that had never truly been a choice in the open sense. It had been the only option he could live with. What he thought about was the quieter, harder thing. The years of trying and failing, the 100 rejections, the scrap cart. The mornings when getting up felt like lifting something too heavy. He thought about how none of it had been wasted. Every piece of it had made him into someone who could sit at a good desk in a real company on a quiet evening and feel something he had not felt in a very long time. Not just relief, something steadier than relief. He turned back to his work. He opened the folder and picked up his pen and continued writing. Outside the window, the city moved through its night. Somewhere across the city, Harlan was sitting in his chair at home after dinner. Mira was in the kitchen putting things away quietly. They were doing the ordinary things that people do when the hard part is behind them and the evening is calm. They had not stopped struggling completely. Life does not turn that fast. But the weight of it was different now. Lighter in a way that was hard to explain but very easy to feel when you had carried the heavy version for as long as they had. There is only one thing to say at the end of the story, and it is not a long thing. A man found something that did not belong to him. He was poor, he was tired, he had been trying for years and failing. He had every reason in the world to keep what he found and walk in the other direction, but he did not. He held the thing that was not his, and he carried it back to its owner with every note intact. And from that one act, the direction of his life changed. Not because the world rewarded good people automatically, but because the right person saw who he truly was in the most honest possible moment and chose to open a door. If you made it to the end of this story, please leave a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. Are you in New York, South Africa, Canada, Jamaica, the United Kingdom, Botswana, Kenya, the United States, anywhere at all? We want to hear from you. Drop your location in the comments below. Let the world see how far this story has reached. And if this story moved you even a little, please like this video, share it with someone you know, and subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story. There are more powerful stories coming, and you do not want to be the last one to hear them. Thank you for watching, and God bless you wherever you are.